October 1849, Kit Carson was trying his hand at cattle ranching 60 miles east of Taos amid the grassy slopes and mesas of Rayado, New Mexico. He was 39, reaching middle age. He had roamed the length and breadth of the American West since he was 16, and he was now attempting to make a permanent home for himself and his family. For the past 23 years, he'd made his living first as a Rocky Mountain fur trapper, then as a professional hunter, and finally as a guide for U.S. Army exploratory expeditions. The expeditions had been widely publicized, and in an odd twist of fate, they had brought Carson a measure of national fame. It was a fame the frontiersman didn't fully comprehend and treated with some disregard. But it was a fame with which he would soon collide, quite unexpectedly, and the impact of that collision would leave him deeply unsettled. On October 24th, some 50 miles east of Kit Carson's ranch, Hickory Apaches attacked a group of travelers near the Point of Rocks landmark on the Santa Fe Trail. The Indians killed the men among the travelers and took a woman named Ann White, her baby, and a female nursemaid captive. When word reached the settlements, a mounted army unit from Taos made its way through the mountain passes eastward toward the Santa Fe Trail with the mission of rescuing the captives. When the unit reached the area near Kit Carson's ranch at Rayado, Kit hired on as an additional scout and guide. Kit was intimately familiar with the Santa Fe Trail. At age 16, he'd run away from an apprenticeship in a saddle shop in Franklin, Missouri, to join a trading caravan headed west over the trail. The 16-year-old helped drive wagons loaded with goods and looked after livestock. In New Mexico, he wound up in Taos, being mentored by a fur trapper who had served with Carson's older brothers in the War of 1812. Kit trapped beaver up and down the Rocky Mountain Range with legendary trapping brigade leaders like Ewing Young and Jim Bridger from 1829 through the end of the beaver trade in 1841. Demand for beaver furs collapsed when the preferred covering for men's hats shifted from beaver felt to silk. Plus, beaver populations had been decimated by overtrapping. As Carson stated, beaver was getting scarce. It became necessary to try our hand at something else. Kit wound up at Bent's Fort in what would become southeastern Colorado. The fort sat along the mountain branch of the Santa Fe Trail and specialized in trading with Indians for buffalo hides. Wagon caravans transported the hides to Missouri in the spring and fall and returned with loads of trade goods. Bent's Fort employed dozens of personnel, and Kit and other hunters were paid to bring in deer, antelope, and buffalo meat to feed the fort's population. Kit had married an Indian woman along the way who died of illness. The two had a daughter who was now school age, and in 1842, Carson took her back to Missouri to be educated by relatives. On his return to Bent's Fort, during the portion of the trip made by steamboat up the Missouri River, he met an Army topographical officer named John C. Fremont. Fremont was preparing for an expedition to map the first portion of the Oregon Trail. Expansionist-minded members of the U.S. Congress, including Fremont's father-in-law, Thomas Hart Benton of Missouri, wanted to publish a guidebook that would encourage immigration to Oregon. When Fremont learned of Kit's extensive experience trapping the region Fremont planned to survey, he asked the experienced mountain man to guide his expedition. Kit accepted. The expedition went well, and the resulting guidebook portrayed Carson in a heroic light. Excerpts from the book were published in newspapers across the country, and virtually overnight, large numbers of Americans had heard the name Kit Carson. Two follow-up expeditions solidified Kit's fame. Now, the skilled frontiersman, along with a couple of other experienced guides, rode at the head of a mounted army unit in search of female captives kidnapped by the Apaches. He'd been recruited to join the mission not for his fame, but for his extensive knowledge and experience. The hopeful rescuers made their way eastward up the Cimarron Cutoff branch of the Santa Fe Trail. Just east of the Point of Rocks landmark, they came upon the scene of the massacre, now more than 2 weeks old. The bodies of the slain men had been buried by other travelers who had happened by, but it was a scene of destruction. As Carson stated, "I was the first man that found the camp where the murder had been committed. Found trunks that were broken open, harness cut, and everything destroyed that Indians could not carry with them." The small group of victims had split from a large caravan of wagons after crossing the Kansas plains. The caravan leader chose to send his wagon master ahead for fresh mules. Upon hearing this, James White, a member of the caravan and an experienced Santa Fe trader, wished to accompany the wagon master. White's young wife Anne, their infant child, and nursemaid were along on this trip. The weather was getting cold, and White wished to get his wife and baby to a hotel in Santa Fe as quickly as possible. Soon, the wagon master, the White party, traveling in 2 carriages, and a couple of other men set off down the Cimarron branch of the trail. Some days later, they made camp just east of the Point of Rocks landmark in northeastern New Mexico. Here, a group of Jicarilla Apache and Ute Indians approached the travelers asking for gifts. The Indians were sent away, twice, and then returned and attacked. They killed all the men in the party of travelers and took the 2 women and the infant child captive. Days later, word of the massacre reached Santa Fe and Taos. Now, after surveying the destruction of the travelers' camp, the Army Rescue Party, with Kit Carson and the other scouts in the lead, took the trail of the Indians. But it wouldn't be easy going. Not only was the trail 2 weeks old, the Apaches took steps to confuse potential trackers. When they broke camp each morning, they would split into pairs and exit camp in multiple directions, then meet up later at a designated point. Carson later said it was one of the most difficult trails he'd ever followed. It took several days. Each time the trackers came upon an abandoned Indian campsite, they found an article of Ann White's clothing. It occurred to them that she might be attempting to leave traces for potential rescuers. Finally, some 125 miles southeast of the massacre site, just north of today's Tucumcari, New Mexico, the rescuers sighted a large Indian camp along the Canadian River. Kit Carson was in the lead when the sighting occurred, and he immediately started for the camp, calling for the Army unit to follow. Kit's experience told him that a rapid, surprise attack on the Indians would provide the best chance of rescuing Ann White alive. But the less experienced Army commander halted his soldiers. He thought negotiation would be a better tack. Meanwhile, the Apaches spotted the U.S. troops and prepared to flee. One Indian fired a shot from a great distance that incredibly struck the Army commander in the chest, but did not do any serious damage, having traveled too far to be deadly. Recovering from the shock, the commander then ordered a charge, but it was too late. Carson would later dictate in his memoir, "In about 200 yards pursuing the Indians, the body of Mrs. White was found, perfectly warm, had not been killed more than 5 minutes, shot through the heart with an arrow. She apparently knew that someone was coming to her rescue. She did not see us, but it was apparent that she was endeavoring to make her escape when she received the fatal shot." A soldier who saw her corpse described Ann White as quite beautiful, but that she had been badly abused and treated brutally. He believed that had she not been killed, she couldn't have lived long. The bodies of the murdered infant and nursemaid were later found not far from the camp. But something else was found in the camp that staggered Kit Carson. Among what must have been Ann White's belongings was a copy of a sensational dime novel about none other than Kit himself. No title was ever mentioned, but it is surmised to have been a book published earlier that year called Kit Carson, Prince of the Gold Hunters. In the pulp novel, Kit is described as a hulking, heroic figure who had killed hundreds of Indians and who rescues a captive like Ann White just in the nick of time. The real Kit was of smaller stature, with light hair, pale blue eyes, and slightly stooped shoulders. He had killed Indians and was ferocious in a fight, but he was soft-spoken, spoke little, and was quite modest. He was also illiterate, having had no formal schooling. He couldn't read the book himself, so later, around a campfire, others read it aloud to him. He was both stunned by the existence of the book and greatly troubled by the ironic circumstances in which it was discovered. In his dictated memoir, he would later state, "We found a book in camp, the first of the kind I had ever seen, in which I was represented as a great hero, slaying Indians by the hundred. I have often thought that Mrs. White must have read it, and knowing that I lived nearby, must have prayed for my appearance in order that she might be saved. I did come, but I lacked the power to persuade those who were in command over me to follow my plan for her rescue." Carson remained troubled over the incident for years. Many other authors and publishers would exploit his name in the decades to come, publishing dozens more dime novels featuring a fictional Kit Carson in larger-than-life adventures. Kit laughed them off as ridiculous, but the memory of the Ann White episode surely haunted him on occasion. Some years following the incident, a friend offered to purchase Kit a copy of Kit Carson, Prince of the Gold Hunters. The legendary frontiersman refused the offer with a succinct, brusque response: "I'd burn the damn